to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta on the day that we are going to Portugal, flying to Paris, connecting over to Porto, and you're introducing me already to some Portuguese red. Gave me heartburn.
Heavy duty research over the last month or so in the LaPanta household, sampling Portuguese wines to make sure we had some idea of what we were going to experience when we were there. And I've loved it. The Douro Valley, where we're going to do a wine tasting river tour one of the days we're there. I don't know which vineyards we're visiting, but we've had 3 or 4 wines from that Douro River Valley that we really like. Have had a couple of the Vino Verdes, a really light, almost fizzy white wine that refreshing. Those are going to be good. Had a few from the Dow area, a couple from the Lisboa area where I know we're having another wine tour. I'm excited about the wine portion of this trip. Knew nothing about Portuguese wine until about 6 weeks ago. Still know very little, but know enough to know that I'm going to like it.
Michael Kenny and I already started talking about next year's trip, which we'll catch you up on soon. And
oh, good.
Might have to learn about sake.
That's possible. We had talked about that. I'm more intrigued by some of the other trips we talked about last year, but
I just love the just dead air there for a second as you comprehended what I was saying.
Yeah. Well, we had talked about a couple other locations as possibilities for this year's trip before we landed on Portugal, and I'm excited about that. It's always it's funny how we've already had people start to ask about next year's trip, and we got a big group this year. I think it's 42 people that signed up for this trip. I'm always thankful that people choose to take their vacations this way with us. Every time people have come along, they've talked about how much they love the trips. Great to see some of the returning faces back and throw in and mix in some new people. Great to see friendships that have developed among the people that travel with us. So anywhere we go, it's going to be great. The key is we got to go someplace that Peter's an expert, because we're going to be missing our guide, Peter, who's been with us on every trip so far and will not be with us in Portugal. So I don't know what his knowledge level would be if we...
I wonder if the Austrians ever beat the Japanese in anything.
I don't think so. Although even if they hadn't, he'd come up with a reason why they used to rule that part of the world.
Yeah. So I haven't had wine since probably December, and I just took one sip and got heartburn immediately. You think that's
not the wine?
It's not the wine?
No.
Am I just out of practice?
It's probably out of practice. You've probably lost your wine card. You've lost your restaurant card in the past. You've lost some of those, so it wouldn't surprise me if you've just lost your taste, but you'll get it back quickly. I found there's a lot of similarities to other European wines, like Italian wines, in the little bit acidic, a little bit tannic, complex taste. It's not like the California cabs or even some of the big, heavy French wines. It's more similar, I think, to what we've experienced in Italy. There's a little overlap with some of the Spanish wines, like in Spain, they have a grape, the Albarino grape, which we really like for a white wine. Portugal calls it Alvarinha, but it's the same grape. There's another, they call it Tinta Roriz, I think, in Portugal, and it's the Tempranillo grape from Spain, which I like in some wines. So there's some overlaps, I think, to what we experienced in Italy and then what we've had in the past from Spain that's really good. And because it's kind of new, I think, into the old world winemaking, it's just not as expensive. So a lot of these wines have been really good, where if it came from someplace in Tuscany or someplace in some of the other bigger wine regions in Italy, like if it was a Barolo, it would probably cost $30 or $40, and I've found pretty good ones at the store for between $15 and $20. So I'm excited about that part too. I don't know anything about Portuguese food. Have you looked into that at all?
No. Ken Cutler, who's coming on our trip, emailed me that he loves Portuguese food.
Really? You think he'll have his briefcase full of very important papers?
Yes, and definitely some hopefully of some restaurant recommendations, because I don't know if you saw the itinerary. We have a lot of nights off, so to speak. So we'll be going out.
I've had a few people who have given me areas they really like, not specific restaurants, but that everybody with whom I've spoken that's been to Lisbon has told me how much they love it. I happened to have a guy at a Twins game the other night stop me and tell me he had been to the Douro River Valley and that it's beautiful. And there's another, I don't know if we're going, I think it's just a little ways away from Lisbon. It was called like the Riviera. That was the winery in this place where it kind of looked like Cinque Terre. He showed me a picture of it. All these pastel colored houses like built into the side of the mountain. It looked a lot like Cinque Terre.
Very
so
cool.
I wonder I don't know if that's on our itinerary or not, and he gave me a couple spots there that like a street that they went to. Couldn't remember the name of places, but everybody with whom I've spoken has said how much they love the people there, love just the laid back atmosphere, beautiful places. I'm really excited about the trip.
Yeah, it'll be fun because also neither of us have ever been there before. So,
are you on the same flight with us?
Yes, I am.
Nice.
Yep.
Are you sitting in the same row as Margo and I? Like,
no, you'll be about if you're in row 1.
Yeah, so we'll not be in row 1. We'll be back among the commoners. I don't know. We're probably in row 42K or something, but we'll see.
So thanks for everybody for joining us inside the on location Aquarius Home Services studio. Pay attention to our social media and the next upcoming podcast because we will be doing a live show in August. And then once the regular season starts again, we'll be doing a couple of shows a month. That is the plan. First day of development camp, or I should say this, first day of development camp for us, and first day is on the ice for the players today down at Treorenka. Development camp actually started a couple days ago. If people have been paying attention to the Wild social media, they know that. They went over to Large Fletcher's, which has become the tradition in development camp. They played some beach volleyball, had a good meal last night, and then today on the ice for the first time. And the one thing that's very clear that you always, like, I don't know if you always feel this because I've covered endless amounts of development camp, Anthony, but you always can, the real upper echelon players, the high draft picks always just pop out at you. And today was no different. It was very clear that Riley Heidt is an absolute stud.
And Zeev Boyum in 3 strides.
It's just crazy.
Looked like a different skater than anybody else on the ice.
And then the other one that actually really just showed something to me that's going to be really fascinating is Sammy Halvig. We'll just call him Sammy. He's the Slovakian kid that they signed as a free agent that played in the World Championships that really showed last year as well. And he is going to be in Iowa. I think he's going to push the guys this year, and it's going to be interesting what happens, obviously, with Gustafsson, with Wallstedt, if they actually carry 3 goalies on their roster. But suddenly, if you looked at training camp today, development camp compared to a year ago, they are just chock full of goaltenders right now. They basically have, between their AHL guys and the guys they've drafted that are here, they have 7 goalies under contract. It's crazy.
That's different, but I think I'll go back to the skaters. And the last time that there was a development camp where there were skaters that had this kind of excitement was that last wave of Wild players, when at development camp at the same time you had guys like Brodin and Granlund, and I think Zucker maybe was there at that same time. And
Coyle.
And it was, you were just watching guys like, well, these guys are clearly NHL players. It was just a matter of time. And I think that's what you saw today from these guys. And even just talking to him, listening to Heidt after, and the way he carries himself.
Heidt carries himself like he is like not 19.
No.
Yeah.
He carries himself like a guy who's got a couple of years in the NHL already.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a cocky way, just a confident way.
But there's no doubt when you ask him, he expects to make this team, and he's 19 years old.
He does.
It's crazy.
But yet at the same time, it was clear he's not assuming that he's already made the team.
Right.
And the same with Liam Ohgren. He was confident.
Yeah.
And I thought his answer was funny when somebody asked him what he had to work on. He said, well, I don't have to get any stronger. I just have to get faster.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, well, you might have to get stronger, but I know what he was trying to say is that his primary focus was speed, not strength.
But if you look at him, he has an NHL body. And
he does.
His dad's a trainer.
But every player in the NHL will tell you that they're trying to get stronger and faster.
Right.
And so just the way he worded it sounded funny. But at the same time, he was clear, like he expects to make the team, expects to have an impact, but isn't taking it for granted, knows he has to come here and earn a spot on the team, even though he got a taste of the NHL last year.
You know, the one thing that was very clear, too, when you talk to not just the prospects, but some of the Wild guys that I was talking to this summer that normally don't spend every day on the ice this early, is they all look at Marco Rossi this last year as an example of what they should be doing. You know, that is Liam Ohgren's father is a physical trainer that works with NHLers forever in Sweden, yet he felt the necessity to come over here and spend most of June here. He's going to come back in late August. He's going to go home. But more and more guys are saying, well, it worked for Rossi. I'm going to do the same thing. And you saw how many of the Wild guys were already on the ice here today, you know, and today was a light group. Sometimes it's 6 or 7 guys. Sometimes it's like 20. But today it was Boldy and it was Sammy Walker and Huznadinov is already in town and Brock Faber. It's kind of interesting that they have Huznadinov skating with the NHLers, but not Ohgren. That Ohgren is still in their eyes, and they're the same age. I mean, basically.
Same age. I think it's just a little different with how much experience they got last year.
Right.
Don't you?
One guy's a pro, had played hundreds of games professionally in Russia, and one guy
hadn't.
Yeah.
And then one guy played 20 plus in the NHL, right?
Yep.
Who's Nadinov, and then
Ohgren played 4.
a handful. So
Yep.
I think there's a difference for a lot of reasons there. And maybe also just gives you an idea of, and part of it's the role they play.
Mm-hmm.
I think they look at Huznadinov as, if he's a third or fourth line guy, he probably doesn't have to show as much in camp as Ohgren, who might be competing for the one top 6 spot that could be available to an up and coming guy.
Sure hope so.
And if he's got to show more in camp.
Right.
And if he doesn't earn that spot, he isn't a guy you're going to keep in the NHL, at least I don't think, to throw on your fourth line. My guess would be if he's not going to be in the top 6, maybe an outside shot he could be on a third line. But if it's less than that, I think they'd look at him and say, go to Iowa, even if it's for 3 weeks or a month, and dominate down there and then come back up here.
I think there could be some guys that are up and down this year, and I think Ohgren. I think you're exactly right. I don't think Ohgren, I don't think he's a shoo-in to make the team. Where I think Huznadinov is probably more likely because also the role that they play. Right, Huznadinov is sort of penciled in as a fourth line center right now. Where
right, yeah, and that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Is that he probably has less to prove in camp.
Right.
He could just, as long as he just comes to camp and appears ready, and not that he doesn't have things to prove, but Ohgren has to come and outplay some pretty experienced NHL veterans in order to earn a spot in the top 6.
Right now they have $1.531 million of cap space. Let's assume nothing else happens the rest of the offseason. That's not even 200. That's about 3 or 4 days into the season of being 2 $775,000 recalls. So I don't think they're going to keep extra guys around if they're not going to play. And Lauko's on a one-way. Ogren's not. So maybe Lauko gets that spot. The other thing is, like, if Gustafsson isn't traded, I think the plan is to have Wallstedt on the roster a lot this year. And I think that could get awfully crowded. I think that's going to, if he's not playing, it's going to, lead to some scrutiny of what are they, doing here. But it's going to be really fascinating to me how they handle the 3 goalies here, because as I mentioned, they have 4 or 5 other goalies under contract. So they have obviously Fleury, Gustafsson, and Wallstedt, but then they have 4 other guys that are already signed that are either on NHL or AHL deals, between the Russo kid that they just signed and McClellan, who they signed out of University of Wisconsin, and then obviously the kid that they just signed on that was supposed to be the 5th goalie in free agency, and then the kid that they signed from Slovakia. So you have those 4 guys under contract, and obviously only 4 spots in the minors. So you're going to be sending those guys to other teams and other organizations. It's going to be fascinating how they handle that. And I just think that we're going to see Wallstedt up on I think that there's going to be times this year that we're going to have 3 goalies
I think
on
without
the
a
NHL
doubt
roster.
we will. And I've kind of felt that all summer when we've talked about it, where I've always been of the opinion that, number one, they weren't forced to trade Gus, because I don't think they had any problem keeping all 3 of these guys in the fold. And I don't know that it'll be a permanent thing, and it might be where the schedule in the NHL is light. Well, let's send Wallstedt back down and get 2-3 starts in the American Hockey League. But then when it's a 4-game and 6-night stretch, bring him back up here, and you probably see all 3 guys get opportunities in the NHL. And a lot of that obviously depends on the health of Fleury and the performance of both Fleury and Gus. And if both of those guys stay healthy and play really well, it's not a bad thing to have Wallstedt go spend a half a season in the American League. And it wouldn't shock me if, even as the season gets going, that no matter what's happening with the Wild, if all of a sudden there's somebody out there that's in need of a goaltender, now you've got a pretty valuable chip on the trade market, knowing that you've got another guy who appears to be NHL ready.
I want to talk to you about Charlie Stramel, but let's first hear a word from some of our sponsors. Summer temps may be heating up, but at Aquarius, that just means it's a summer meltdown. And what's melting away, you ask? How about all your worries about your home's water? Whether it's city or well water, say goodbye to white scale buildup, rust stains, and contaminants like those PFAs, forever chemicals. No more funny tastes or smells, just worry-free water with a Connecticut water treatment system. Connecticut uses zero electricity and minimal salt, giving you purified drinking water right from your faucet. I've had it in my house. It's absolutely incredible. And guess what else is melting away? The price. Now through July, enjoy $500 off their new whole home Connecticut water treatment system. The Aquarius and Connecticut summer meltdown of savings all starts with a free water analysis. So make sure you get that scheduled today at AquariusHomeservices.com. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius believes in earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
Don't wait. Save smarter with a 5.15% annual percentage yield 9-month certificate from Royal Credit Union. Royal's 5.15% 9-month certificate has no minimum opening balance and a locked-in rate for a guaranteed return on your investment. Open a 5.15% 9-month certificate at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate515. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 4/26/24. Insured by NCUA.
Back here, worst seats in the house, Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta coming to you from the Aquarius Home Services studio. Anthony, Charlie Stramel talked today. Whether he believes it or not, he didn't make any excuses, didn't use his injuries, didn't use his deployment last year at University of Wisconsin. He just said that this is a huge year for him and that it was a no-brainer to transfer to play for Adam Nightingale, who was for 2 years his UN national development team coach with the United States Hockey League. Obviously going to Michigan State's going to be big for him, but now it's on him. Like, there's no more excuses. You can't use Wisconsin as an issue anymore, and that Tony Granato left, and then Mike Hastings came in, and you're not his guy, and the injuries. Like, at some point now, it's on you. And he made it very clear this year that it's up to him to rediscover the game that led to the Wild drafting him in the first round in the first place and coming out and proving everybody right and silencing the critics.
I think that point is now, without a doubt. And I usually am wary anytime a guy at any level transfers, because I always feel like it's very rarely the coach. Mm-hmm. It's 98% of the time it's the player, whether you're talking about high school kids that transfer, college kids that transfer. It's very rarely the coach. But this was the one spot where when there's a coaching change and it's a different guy than brought you in, I give a guy a pass on the second failure at Wisconsin.
Like, this is why the portal should exist.
Exactly. The first time, if he had left after the first year before the coaching change, I would have said that this is what's killing college sports, is the fact that every guy who doesn't like his role just go play somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And instead of figuring it out and playing through years where you have to earn your spot and move up in the lineup, move up in your important role, however you want to call it. But I think with him, because it was a coaching change, give him the benefit of the doubt and say that, okay, the guy that brought him in wasn't there anymore. The new guy who came in he truly might not have seen the same kind of potential or valued his skill set the same way. So go take another shot, but this is the time. Right now, if it doesn't work at Michigan State, then I think you have to start to look in the mirror and say, look, am I really cut out for this?
Mm-hmm. I think the one thing that all of us need to remember, and it's not just fans, it's definitely the media, is that he's 19 years old. I mean, Rossi is 22 and just figured it out last year after also having people flippantly throw around the bust word. And so Rossi is 3 years older than him, and it worked out for him. It is so foolish for people to just sit there and just immediately assume that this kid is just not going to make it because so far he's had 2 tough years in college. A couple weeks ago, I talked to Ole Ohgren on the phone, who's coaching in the Swedish Hockey League now, wants to eventually come back to the NHL. And I remember he was going to quit the sport of hockey after he got to Florida and failed after his tough times in both the Islanders and the LA Kings. He gets to Florida, had one horrible year, was going to quit hockey that summer, comes back, all of a sudden becomes a 30-plus goal guy, then eventually the leading scorer in Panthers history before Sasha Barkov broke that. But all of a sudden it took him playing for Mike Keenan to suddenly have it pop. And that was somebody that was in his mid-20s at the time. And there are just so many examples in hockey of people just assuming that some guy is just going to be a cast-off. And it's just...
Think of how few players have shown by 19 or even 20 what kind of player they're going to be.
Yeah.
Most of them, you don't even know who they are yet at that point in their life.
Yeah. Just imagine, I mean, just think of what you were at that age. I mean, it's just, it takes, sometimes maturity takes a while. Obviously, he's had some unbelievable trials and tribulations in his life, losing his dad a couple of years ago. I think that we all have to just hit the brakes and just let him go out there. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then you could just say, you know what? Assume that he was the second round pick and Riley Heidt that draft was the first round pick, because it sure looks like Riley Height's gonna take off. But there just too many people. Like I see it all the time. Like even the other day, like at the draft, people like Ryder Ritchie had a tough year in the WHL, missing a ton of time with the had a quad hematoma. And he's obviously undersized now. He's 17 years old. He's not done growing yet. But people are like, oh, another small forward on Twitter. You know, it's just like just everybody just chillax. Let these, you're not going to see, we know how it is with the Wild anyway. These guys aren't going to be players that we're going to most likely see for 3 or 4 years anyway. So like, you know, let's all calm down and let them develop at their own time. They have a ton of prospects. They're bound to hit on a couple of them.
Do you know how upside down the world is when Michael Russo is the one telling people to relax?
Yeah. You know, I got to tell you.
I agree with you, but I'm just saying, like, it is. You're
Do you know what it's
right.
going to be like for me to have to spend the next week and a half with you? I'm already tired of you, this podcast, and now,
this is now normal.
My mother was driving. My mother was driving to the airport today, and she goes to me, and she's like, "Are you and Anthony going to get along?" And I'm like, "That's up to him."
I always am up for getting along.
Yeah. So,
but I think you're right when the way that people state their case, like so demonstratively, where it's this guy is clearly a failure.
Yeah.
He's not clear. And who are you to assess this?
Yeah.
And even some of the people who do it for a living, who write the prospect reviews and everything, they're not right all the time.
mm-hmm.
Nobody, or very rarely, are people going back and saying, hey, wait a minute, here's what you wrote 3 years ago about this kid when he was drafted, who's now an NHL All-Star. And there's no accountability for most of it. And, you know, I'll have people that'll come up to me, and whether they're quoting the Athletics prospect writers or even the Central Scouting Bureau with their rankings, and why are we doing picking a guy who's ranked 47th? Well, the guys who are there don't have a job with an NHL franchise as their director of player personnel. That means the NHL teams value their guys more than these guys and value their opinions more. This is why these guys make a living, and it's how they either keep or lose their jobs. They have to be right on some of this stuff. And the people who just assume that because somebody else said it, that this guy's can't do this or can't do that. I had a guy that stopped by the Twin Set the other night, and why the Wild draft another guy who can't skate? It's like, which guy can't skate? I mean,
you know,
I've never seen any of them skate.
And I will say, I mean, you know, like, I mean, again, it's up to Stramel to show us. And I think that with Stramel, the one, but this is with everybody. That's why, like, it's not just unique to Stramel. I think what's unique to Stramel is that a lot of the people that are talking have seen him play in high school and college, and they're seeing him much more often. But, you know, the same thing was said about Rossi. I remember, again, I've told this story 1,000 times on this podcast, and I love the guy that wrote it. But in 2011, you know, the Wild got lambasted by a certain columnist in town because they took a guy named Jonas Brodin, a quote soft Swede, over Duncan Siemens, who I don't even know if he ever played an NHL game, because he was a tough Canadian, was essentially the premise of the column. And here Jonas Brodin has been here. We're now going on 13 years later on the same organization. Pretty good defenseman he turned out to be.
He's okay.
Yeah, he is okay. Although I saw today somebody didn't have him on the team, like Sweden for the Four Nations. I would think that he'd have a shot.
I can't imagine a Swedish national team that wouldn't have Jonas Brodin in their top 6 defensemen.
I agree with you. I mean, I agree that some guys have popped since, like Gus Forsling and people like that. But at a minimum, the one thing about the Four Nations roster that's really, it's just very like prohibitive almost. Like the NHL has made this one tight roster where they're going to 3 goalies, 13 forwards, and 7 defensemen, essentially, is what the roster is. It's 20 skaters and 3 goalies. So it's like, I was even talking to Bill Guerin the other day. I mean, it's one reason why it's a true round robin with very little, like, they limited the games because they're so worried about injuries. And so, but I was talking to Bill Guerin the other day about, like, the USA hockey team and how, you're an injury 2 away of being shorthanded playing in this tournament. It just seems bizarre that there's not some sort of taxi squad or whatever. I don't know. I don't know how you could have made this any better, but it's like one of those throw-in tournaments that I don't think anybody really wanted, and now they're trying to act like it's like this biggest thing.
Well, and I think there's a learning curve that will happen for sure, but my guess is they were trying to make it minimal for the guys that they don't want to have a bunch of guys that go up there and don't play.
Right. And especially when the other 700 people in the National Hockey League are on their buys throwing stuff on social media, and now you're not even playing in Boston and Montreal. And you mentioned that I haven't studied Sweden's roster or anything, but you mentioned guys like Forsling had a great playoff. He had a really good season for a really good team. But Brodin's been doing this for 10 years, where he's one of the elite shutdown defensemen, maybe underappreciated nationally, but I don't think one run to a cup for Forsling. Would you take Gus Forsling over Jonas Brodin right now? Yes.
In a top 6? I would not.
Yeah.
And Forsling, if you look at Forsling's numbers throughout his career, and I looked at him after, because I was surprised.
Yes.
I was surprised at how big the contract was that he got.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I think it's going to be the biggest bargain in hockey in a year.
Maybe, but it was the guy. He hasn't been a big offensive producer,
right?
Slightly bigger than Brodin, but not light years better.
I think it's going to continue to excel for him.
Maybe, he might turn out to be a much better player. But we're talking about a guy who's Brodin's around 30 points every year, and Forsling's 35.
Yeah,
it's not like we're talking about a guy who's 70
much
points.
Like Brodin, it's something with those two brains that they both have. It's like if they're going to step up in the play, they're going to know it works. Like, when do you ever see Jonas Brodin get?
Forsling was a plus 50 or something this year, and now granted he was on a team where everybody was a plus, so it's a little bit off, but still. Plus 50 is plus 50. Yeah. He had an unbelievable year.
Yeah. You got to see him up close.
No, I
hate to say it like this because I just pumped up Brodin's, like I'm telling you that Gus Forsling right now at the product he is right now. I'm not saying what he was the last 2-3 years when he was cast off in Vancouver,
he's
Carolina.
Younger right now.
But I'm telling you, this guy is everything that they wish Brodin was. Like, he's got a physicality to his game. He is so elite. It's not funny.
I still
they got to get him away from Ekblad though.
Yeah, I'd have to see it against the best in the NHL for 5 years in a row, like we've seen from Brodin.
Yeah, Brodin though. One concern with him is his lack of physicality, and his play on the PK was just abysmal this year. It really was. I mean, if you look at his numbers, and that certainly wasn't the case with Forsling. So
yeah, I think Brodin's was a factor, a little bit of a factor of who was around him.
Yeah. But I think a lot of it, and I think the Wild are getting fed up with it too, and I think they're really going to work with him in camp, is that he does not clear out bodies, and that is an issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's always defended with his feet.
Yeah, and his stick,
and sometimes that works. There are times where, and he's not a small guy, but he's not a big, strong, imposing guy either.
Any other guys today, really stand out to you? I mean. Ohgren was somebody that I know we talked about, but
I was really watching Heidt and Boyum in almost every drill just because I wanted to. When I walked in, and I missed the first part, I had to drive around town today to take my mom to a doctor's appointment, so I missed the first group. That I got there right as the first group was coming off the ice, but the second group, it was about 40 seconds into the workout where without a roster, it was
Right.
look at those two guys skate.
Yeah. Well, I think Ohgren was in the first group, so that's probably why you didn't see a lot of him.
Yeah,
Am I
well, I
wrong?
was saying afterward, like I didn't even really notice him,
Yeah.
and then I didn't even look at who was in what group.
Yeah.
But I was watching Boyum, and it 4 strides. It was like, holy cow, look at this guy.
Yeah, no, he could skate and he's confident, and it's going to be really fascinating to watch his development because obviously he just won an NCHC championship. He won a World Junior gold medal. He won an under 18 gold medal last year. He won the NCAA championship. He's going to go back to Denver this year. He's going to get to play for David Carl in the World Juniors again. The question is, when do the Wild sign him? Can they stick him right in the lineup? All that type of stuff. How far he is undersized. So it's like, this is not somebody that, I don't think he's a finished product the way that Brock Faber was. Like the Wild, remember, he was a year past. First of all, he's a young 18, and Brock Faber was end of junior year that he came out, and the Wild knew right away he was NHL ready. They're not talking like that yet about Zeev Buium. So I think everybody also with him needs to hit the brakes on like, people are assuming that he's just taking Declan Chisholm's role in a year. That is absolutely not the case right now.
It would not. Based on what and I didn't watch a ton of Denver games last year, but I did watch some late in the season, and then even just watching him skate today, it would not surprise me at all if after this season at Denver, he arrives in St. Paul when the college hockey season's over.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's immediately on the team in 2 years, is what I'm saying.
And it doesn't even mean, and I'm not saying that if he doesn't do that it means something went awry. It just wouldn't surprise me if that's what happened.
He'll be a 19-year-old defenseman. Faber's got it. The thing about Faber is he might not look big because he just doesn't he's not towering, but he is a big freaking linebacker. Yeah. Like, you get big. He is a linebacker on skates.
Just from the first day we watched him, to me, it's like watching Charlie McAvoy play. And I know there's just a similarity in the way they carry themselves, the way that they're both right shot guys, just kind of the way I don't know, there's just something about their presence that he's always reminded me of McAvoy, which would be great if that's who he turns out to be. That'd be a good player.
Yeah, absolutely. Future Wild captain, I still think. Which is, by the way, saying a lot because there's a lot. I mean, obviously, first of all, Spurgeon's got a lot of time left on his time here in Minnesota, but there's a lot. They got a lot of really quality leaders suddenly. I mean, we saw Kaprizov really excel last year. Obviously, they got Foligno, but in the future, I mean, Ohgren and, a lot of these guys that they have drafted lately, just seem to scream, leadership and people to follow and things like that. So it's pretty cool. On Faber, by the way, so the Wild and his representatives had preliminary talks in Vegas. Not a big in-depth thing. It's really hard to handicap whether or not that extension gets done, at some point this summer, some point in between, meaning at some point next season or even next summer. Again, there's no rush. This is not somebody, he's going to be an RFA again next year. If they don't extend him now. So it's not a big thing, but they're obviously starting those conversations. But this isn't something that we really have to worry about if it doesn't get done imminently or something like that. It just means, and maybe that's the smart thing, is like one side thinks that he's a $9-something million player now, and the other side might think he's not. And maybe you want to say, hey, do it again, and we'll see. And we will see. Middleton, though, got done at 4 times 4.35. That is one, again, he could have been an unrestricted free agent again next summer. That is one still, I think the big question going into it was, do you do it now or do you wait? In a large part because going into next offseason, was it really going to be much more expensive? And so that was one that the Wild just decided that they value him so much. Why wait? And they got him done. Your thoughts on that deal?
It's a fair deal. I think with so many of these, it's all about where you fit on this roster. And I think as you start to look at this defensive core and you say, all right, if you see him as being in your top 4 for the next 2 to 3 years until maybe a Boyum's the next guy that jumps in there, then it's worth it. If you get a top 4 defenseman that plays the kind of minutes that he plays, brings something to the table that the others in the top 4, well, at least two of your top four aren't the big physical type defensemen. And now you have two sets where you've got one guy who can really skate and one guy who's a little bit more of the heavy, capable of playing the heavy game. The roster construction starts to look pretty solid on the back end.
And if you got Bouillon coming, obviously you got like the one guy actually that showed me a lot today is Spacek. I mean, he also just has a presence about him. Maybe it's also that he's a rare right shot on this roster, which you almost look at him like if you can get a Hunt or a Bouillon to pop. Obviously, we just talked about Brodin and Middleton on the left side. On the right side, you got Spurgeon, who's going to be wrapping up. He's got 3 years left on his contract. You got Faber, who's the next right shot guy. Could it be Spacek? He's somebody that on all international tournaments, he looks like he could be a player. He could shoot the puck. Could he be there like eventual, like a Brandon Montour? He's kind of got that wide body like Montour.
Yeah, maybe. And some of the depth guys are going to be gone by then. And
the Bogosians and the Merrills.
And then it becomes on a guy like Declan Chisholm. Can he hold off these guys? He showed some promise, showed a little offensive upside, has to prove he can defend on a regular basis. But if he's a guy that can maybe be your second power play guy or something and be on a third pair, it's nice to have some versatility with some different guys with different skill sets in your defensive core.
When we come back on Worst Seats in the House, I want to talk to you about our conversation on the radio the other day with John Hines, and then we got some Twitter questions as well, and we can talk a little bit more about Portugal and whatever else you want to talk about. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Attorney Jerry Bosch here with Bosch Law Firm and WorkCompExperts.com. For almost 30 years, we've represented Minnesotans just like you all over the great state of Minnesota to guarantee they've been treated fairly and with respect when they've suffered a work-related injury. A work injury can change your life in an instant. You need someone on your side who can help you focus on getting back on your feet and getting paid while you do. You may be entitled to medical benefits, wage loss benefits, job placement, retraining, and payment for permanent disability. To make sure you are being paid all the work comp benefits you're entitled to, please call the attorneys at Bosch Law Firm. The call is always free, and there's never a fee unless we recover benefits on your behalf. Call 651-333-8300, Bosch Law Firm, or visit us at WorkCompExperts.com.
Anthony, tell us about Feller's Ranch.
Well, I'm excited. As we've talked over the last couple of weeks, Feller's Ranch has joined our show as one of our newest sponsors. I'm thrilled about that because of the quality of their steaks is second to none. They're the best steaks I've had. We had Vinny on. He talked about the spinalis cuts that we had tried. We've had their Denver cuts, which are unbelievable. Their ribeyes are terrific. We just had those at Ariana's graduation weekend. But right now, they just have announced that you'll be able to get their brisket at a place down in the southwestern suburbs, Northern Fire Barbecue. It's a cool spot. They've got an unbelievable selection of spices. And I know that the Fellers guys are really excited to have their Wagyu brisket available there. So if you're interested in brisket, you can check it out there. But as always, if you want their steaks delivered directly to your house, just go to fellersranch.com. Their vans are in the cities every week. They'll get it right to your front door. It couldn't be much easier, and you will not be disappointed in their cuts of steak.
Spring has arrived at Twill, and we are preparing for summer as well. And I got to tell you, not only is it a great place to buy graduation gifts for the man in your life, stuff for yourself, it's also a great place. I'm traveling a lot right now covering the Timberwolves. I'm on the road. I'm packing things into a tight suitcase. And what I really notice about the quality of the stuff I get at Twill is that it doesn't wrinkle. It comes out of the suitcase looking good. I tell you what I'm wearing a lot right now, the Brax pants, Johnny O shirts, Peter Millar shirts. They're just made well. So I highly recommend going to Twill in the Edina Galleria. Also sign up for their email alerts at twillmn.com. They will not spam you. They just want you to know when they're going to have a specific event. A lot of the stuff I bought from Twill, I bought at like a buy two or buy three and get one free thing. I have all the dress shirts I need the rest of my life. I bought one time at a Stenstrom's event. So I highly recommend it. Twill in the Edina Galleria. Tell Scott Dayton we sent you, and check out twillmn.com.
Back here, Worst Seats in the House, Mike Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Anthony's got a hole in his wine glass and has just gotten a new bottle.
Same bottle.
Same bottle,
just a refill. This is it's a Duro Tinto. I don't know if we're visiting the Carvalhaus vineyard, but we've had some good ones from there. Picked up a few of them today just to make sure that we were didn't get dehydrated during the show.
Exactly. Appreciate that. All right, so let's talk about. We had John on John Hines on the Fan the other day. You and I, when I was filling in for Barrero, and we talked a lot about the team. And the one thing that he really, made clear on that is that we all know it's been well publicized how limited the cap space was going into this offseason, and that they knew they could essentially sign one player. And going into right after the season, into the first month before they eventually did their sort of get together in mid-May, their big thought was that they were going to go after a David Perron on a 1 or a 2 year deal. And all of a sudden they started really talking about deficiencies with the team, and they felt they were way too easy to play against down the stretch last year, especially obviously after they traded Maroon and Duran and Duhaime and players like that. And they decided to go out and sign Yakov Trenin to the 4-year deal at $14 million, $3.5 per, because of one very big reason. They felt that it was easier to try to get a lot of their guys that had down years to have better years. So he is going to do check-ins all summer with the Ryan Hartmans, with the Freddie Goudreaus, with the Marcus Johanssons. And that is the hope, is that, maybe a Liam Ohgren pops and you can put him on the second line, but maybe you go back and Guerin basically said it and he alluded to it. Maybe you reunite Hartman and Zuccarello and Kaprizov and see now if you have Boldy and Eriksson Ek on that line, who could go on that left side, whether it's a Johansson or an Ohgren or something like that. But it's sounding more and more that they're starting to think that instead of like what we thought last week of having a killer third line of Hartman, Trenin, and Foligno, that we might even see Rossi in that situation.
We could. And I think the beauty of the way the roster is made up is there's a little versatility. Guys that I think maybe ultimately would be guys that wouldn't be in your top 6. Let's say that got somebody like Ohgren or even Heidt come to camp and earn a spot, and they're in your top 6, along with Boldy and Eriksson Ek, Kaprizov, Zuccarello, whether it's Hartman or Rossi. Either way, it gives you one of Hartman or Rossi, Johansson, got in your bottom 6, where if somebody's not on tonight or somebody gets banged up or somebody's just in a slump, you've got a guy lower in your lineup capable of playing in the top 6. So I think it gives the roster some versatility. I also think part of it was that you could look at it and say, I think it's realistic to think that Hartman bounces back, that Foligno bounces back, that Johansson does more than he did, that Gaudreau bounces back. And then on top of it, that I think they probably saw enough from Ohgren in those 4 games to say, maybe not opening night, but at some point this season, he's going to be ready for the NHL.
Yeah.
And rather than spending a little bit more money to get a guy capable of playing in your top 6, let's bank on the fact that one of our prospects is going to be ready, that some of these guys have better years than they had last year, and let's spend the money where we can spend a little bit less per year, but get a guy that can be a part of the future rather than just a bridge, like a Perron or somebody in that ilk would have been. They'd have been a 1 or 2 year guy at max, not a part of the future. Now you got a guy in Trenin who 2-3 years down the road, where this team is supposedly pointing to be built for, hey, this is the point where we think we can be one of the contenders in the West. Now you got a guy who's going to still be here for a part of that.
One of the people that are going on our Portugal trip just sent me a picture of his port beer.
Of his port beer?
Yeah. I think it was a joke.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll explain the difference between beer and wine shortly, but
port beer.
I like it. Yeah, so as long as I guess that means maybe he poured a beer and then put a little brandy in it to turn it into port.
Yeah. So I think the key here is Hartman. I mean, it's so clear that, like when John Hines said on the radio to us the other day that the key to playing with Kaprizov and Zuccarello is you got to be able to play 20 minutes at a high intense pace. It's, that's who he's talking about. They didn't feel that he was in that shape at the beginning of last season, and they eventually took him off. And they, remember when he scored 34 goals here, 33 were at even strength, or am I getting that wrong?
No, that's right.
Okay. I always am. Sometimes I confuse that number with Zucker, because remember there was a year where Zucker had 30 something goals and like they were all at even strength.
Hartman, I believe, I can't remember for sure, but I think he was third or fourth in the league in even strength goals that year.
And if you have Hartman back on that line, Now you have an Eriksson-Ek-Boldy line, or you could always go back with Eriksson-Ek on that killer third line and have Rossi up there. I mean, there's just as you said, there's a lot of flexibility. But I just think what it shows you
where you've seen success.
Yeah,
the Hartman between Zuccarello and Kaprizov is one. But remember how good Eriksson-Ek, Boldy, and Johansson were for the last 2 months after Johansson arrived 2 years ago. And maybe you start to look at, all right, we've seen this have success. Let's at least give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, we have Marco Rossi on our third line. We have Liam Ohgren on our third line or in Iowa or whatever it might be.
I think the one fair thing that we can all agree on, even if you're listening to this freaking out right now that we're even talking about Rossi potentially on the third line and Hartman back on the first line, is that what happened last year can't continue. There was no secondary scoring with a top line of Kaprizov, Eriksson-Ek, and Boldy just lighting it up. And so what they decided here is that they decided to allocate their funds to Trenin on their third line to make them harder to play against, which means that they're most likely not going to come back and just try the same exact thing. And what they're trying to do is balance it out where they don't have to rely on such crazy success of the top line because it didn't lead to success of the team. And so I think that's what they're attempting to do here. We'll see if it works. I have my doubts because I've seen this so many times in my long career covering hockey, Anthony, is that like when you just always rely on internal improvement, you usually leave the next season pretty disappointed. And so there's a lot of pressure on these guys that had down years this year to really come through. And so we'll see.
I think there's a little bit of a difference here, though, because you're talking about guys who last year took major steps backward. It isn't like you're just talking about guys that, hey, we really hope he has. It isn't like talking about Marco Rossi at this point last year, saying that a guy who had scored 0 goals, we really think he's going to take a big step this year. You're just saying Ryan Hartman 2 years ago scored 34. We think he's capable of getting closer to 34 than landing on 20.
Right.
That Marcus Foligno is capable of getting closer to where he was 2 years ago.
Right.
That Johansson is capable of doing what he did the last 2 months of the season before. So it's all Gaudreau, who had 19 the year before. These are all guys who fell off the map in one season. So I think it's a little bit different to say, even if none of them get back to where they were 2 years ago, they at least get closer to that than where they were last year.
Right.
You split the difference somewhere, and you've got guys that are productive.
Yeah. We'll see. But that's at least the rationale inside the team of how they suddenly pivoted and went with the identity guy as Lauko and Trenin versus going out and signing David
Lauko was a low risk guy because you gave away Vinny Lettieri, who did a good job here, but Lettieri was never going to be in the top 6 here and wasn't cut out for a fourth line role. Lauko comes and brings some speed, but also some physicality. So it was just a swap of players in totally different roles. I mean, Lettieri will probably end his career with more goals than Lauko will, but he wouldn't have fit on this roster as well.
Yeah, it's a fourth line identity role in Lauko where they felt that Vinny needed. Basically, what they felt was that they needed to upgrade on a Lettieri, Lucchini, and Mason Shaw line. Is essentially what happened in free agency, and what it does is now you're going to have a Husandinov and maybe Lauko, and you could have Gaudreau on that line. Even at times Johansson could be on that line. At times Ohgren could be on that line. It's going to be interesting how they sort of, decorate this lineup. The Rossi on the third line thing is going to really drive fans nuts. I can't wait. That's just going to be, that won't get old quick if that happens.
And if Rossi outplays Ryan Hartman, he won't be on the third line.
Yes.
If Ryan Hartman outplays him, he will. That's the way the NHL works.
Yeah. Yep. All right, let's go to some Twitter questions. Corn Dog asks, how does the AHL salary cap work? Actually, there's no AHL salary cap. He goes, how are we able to pay these players so much money this year, and why haven't we been doing that in the past? They have, actually. I mean, they've had a lot of guys making $400 or $500 down there for a while. I mean, that's Vinny Lettieri made $550 down there. That's basically, this has been a huge pivot change in the last several years with unrestricted free agents that are signing two-way contracts because they usually have significant offers in Europe or other teams are offering that. So they make a fortune where an Adam Raska, who has no rights, has to still sign for $92,000 or whatever, which is still pretty good living playing in the AHL. lot better than it used to be playing in the AHL. We answered about Highly Wright. We talked about Charlie Stramel, and we talked about Faber's contracts. Any other picks really jump out at you today?
Not really.
Yeah.
I just think those two guys look different than everybody else.
Yeah. A lot of people asking about Huznadinov, about SKA getting the rights from Murat Huznadinov. That is a common thing in the KHL when a trade needs to be made. It's basically like their future considerations. And remember, regardless, Huznadinov technically has a European out clause. That doesn't mean if he doesn't make the team or if he needs to spend some time in Iowa that he won't go to Iowa. But there is technically an out clause that he would go back to the KHL if he didn't make the team or something like that. And if that happened, SKA would have their rights. But either way, this is just a common thing that happens all the time in the KHL. So there's nothing to be alarmed at there. I know contracts normally rule the roost, but have the Wild ever buried a player on an expensive deal in the AHL? Merrill Koff. That has happened. I remember Andre Nazarov was sent to the minors once. That turned out to not be a good move at all for the AHL team, by the way. So they have done that before. Not a long time where they've put like $1 million player down there.
No, but if a couple of these other guys were clearly outplaying him, I don't think they'd have any problem just saying,
exactly,
we'll pay a guy $1 million to play in the American League.
Like if he's the seventh D, you could have a guy making $775 taking that 7th D spot and save $1.15 million on the cap. Obviously, if the guy was making $775, you're still saving $400,000 or $500,000, which in the Wild's cap situation is a pretty penny. Rock NHL. This is going to piss off Anthony. Where would you rank the Wild amongst teams in the Central? 6th or 7th?
Well, why would that piss me off? I think
because I know you don't agree.
Well, they're not 6th or 7th, but I think I haven't really studied all the teams yet, but they're for sure behind Dallas. They're behind Colorado. I think they're ahead of Utah. I think they're ahead of Chicago. I think they're ahead of St. Louis. I'd put them on I think it's going to come down to Minnesota, Nashville, Winnipeg.
I think Nashville is going to.
I don't know. The Nashville.
Winnipeg's the one team I can see take a bit step back. Nashville.
They were aggressive, but I don't think it's as much a given as those guys. You got guys on the tail end of the career. I think Nashville probably would be, if I had to pick like who's going to finish 3rd in the division, I'd probably pick Nashville. But I think 3, 4, 5 will be Minnesota, Winnipeg, Nashville in some order, depending on health and all. I
think Shea's going to take a lot of pressure off Yossi. I think Saros now having the contract done is going to take him into clear headspace. And Stamkos and Marchessault are 240 goal scorers.
They're 40 goal scorers, but they're also
last week.
And no doubt they got better.
They got the Bruno and Darby factor.
That's true. And they were playing great down the stretch last year in the second half. I think Nashville's probably if you had to like rank them right now, I'd probably say they're 3, and that would leave Minnesota and Winnipeg in the 4 or 5 spots. But I don't think the gap between Minnesota and Winnipeg and Nashville is that large. I think any one of those teams.
I think Utah's going to surprise some teams this year.
They'll be better.
Their back end's awesome.
They'll be better, but they're still not. I wouldn't put them ahead of Minnesota. I wouldn't put St. Louis or Chicago ahead of Minnesota. So I'd say Minnesota's probably 4 or 5 in the Central.
Somebody told me today, and you're going to have to pay attention to this since you like to go to the bars on the road. And I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Margo. He never goes to bars.
Not all that often.
But apparently in Utah, like you can't like just get up and like bring your if you go from like table to table, you can't like carry your beer. Like a server's got to bring it for you.
Well, it was interesting. We were talking to Vinny about this. He was home this weekend.
He lives in Utah.
He lives in St. George, Utah, which is a totally different world than Salt Lake. It's 2 hours from Vegas. It's 4 hours from Salt Lake. But in St. George, and I'm just going to, this is general. I don't know the exact laws, but there's something.
I'm sure Vinny's an expert.
But I might just be a hair off on this. You can't order a second beer unless you order food.
Yeah. I was also told today.
Yeah. So you can't, and you don't have to eat the food, but you have to order. They can't serve you 2 drinks without food.
Right.
And I don't think that's a rule in Salt Lake, or at least he didn't.
Somebody told me that if you go out to the college bars there, that like every table's got like just a bunch of carrots on it that aren't eaten because like they order beer and like carrots.
You have to bring a carrot.
And apparently it's like they have like dollar apps at all these places. Sounds like a pretty good place.
Yeah, we'll check
Put
it
in
out.
budget friendly.
I did talk to our NBA.
I think we should just stay up in Park City.
Well, our NBA travelers say they love going to Salt Lake City. So that tells me that.
Have you been to Park City?
No.
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah, it's.
I haven't been to Salt Lake City in 25 years.
I went. I was up there once and I saw Mr. Belding from.
I saw the Salt Lake Buzz play baseball.
Yeah. So in Park City, I was there right before the Sundance festival, the film festival once, and there were a bunch of but Mr. Belding from what was that show? I don't
know who Mr. Belding is.
Mr. Belding. It was oh man, what was that stupid show that was on TV? With Screech.
I think I saw it. I didn't watch it very often.
I'll
I remember
Google it.
They were in a school, right?
Yes.
And it was
lots of doom and gloom this offseason. What are some positive notes for the upcoming season,
Bell.
Jordan? Saved by the Bell. There you go.
The name of the show.
So this is right up your alley. Jordan wants to know positive things about the Wild this year.
With what they did in the offseason? Well, it's a deeper team and it's a more balanced roster with more versatility. So I think that's why. And I'm optimistic about that. I still think the big question is their goaltending. Can Gustafsson get back to what he was 2 years ago? If he's the same guy we saw this last year, it isn't going to be a good year. But if he can play like he played at the end of the season 2 years ago and get pushed by Volstead playing well enough to take games away from him, and Fleury too. Fleury wasn't as good last year as he was the year before. If they get the same goaltending they got last year, I fear we'll be looking at a team that's on the outside looking in when it comes playoff time. But if you get the goaltending you had during the previous season, this is a playoff team.
Joseph wants to know, what's Anthony's opinion on red Vino Verde? VHINO.
Yeah, Vino Verde.
Vino Verde.
I haven't had red Vino Verde. I've had just the white version. I didn't even know there was a red version of it. There's a Vino Verde region, and the white wine from there is really light and it's so citrusy and acidic that it almost has like a fizz to it. Not like Prosecco or champagne fizz, but it has a little bit of that to it. We had some the other night, I like it. I mentioned the Alvarinha earlier. That's my favorite white that we've had so far. But I have not had or seen a red Vino Verde yet. We'll see. I don't know if we're going to the Vino Verde region while we're here or not.
Yeah, we'll have to check this out. Jill wants to know, haven't heard anything about the alumni plans like the Ring of Recognition or something like that. Is this still a thing? Yeah, I mean, they've just hired Mike Snee, I believe it is, who, college hockey and Minnesota hockey.
He was with the Wild way back in the early days, and he's back.
He's now
really
going to run it.
Guy. He'll be a great addition to the.
I met Dominic today, their new teeth services guy, who's going to go over the schedule with me soon. He's a listener of this podcast. He in flying over here for development camp, San Diego, he listened to this and he told me this in front of Sickman, which I don't think is good job security to tell in front of Sickman, say you listen to this podcast.
Well,
maybe Wild on 7th.
Everybody should listen to this podcast.
Exactly. All right, let me just see if that's it.
Especially people with high blood pressure, so Russo can tell you to relax.
All right, Anthony, this is going to be a long trip to Portugal with you. Thank God you're back in 45K when I'm in 1V or something like that.
I'll just wander up and say hi.
If ESPN televised a hot dog eating contest with 4 Minnesota celebrity contestants, you, meaning me, Anthony, Radio Foulness, and Gorg, who would win?
Well,
rules are who can eat 20 the fastest.
I can tell you who would finish 4th, and that would be me.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I had a hot dog.
I actually can't remember either.
I do remember Gorg. I think maybe Andrew Heidt and Dan Myers had some kind of hot dog eating contest in Montreal.
Yep, I have video of it.
And they were claiming the whole, like, how can you go to Montreal and not have a hot dog? And I was like, because I can go to Montreal and have the best food of any city in the NHL.
Yeah.
I'm going to go eat anywhere except arena food hot dogs. Now, apparently the hot dogs there are better than any hot dogs anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know if I buy it.
I don't either. And I've never tried one, and nor
I think it's highly unlikely. It's like on toast.
Toasty dogs.
Toasty dogs, yeah. Dan won that contest, by the way.
Right. So I would say that I guess I'd have to bet on Fallness just because I think he eats hot dogs for dinner like 3 or 4 days a week. But
hey, you have the right to get him back.
Yeah, we had
he goes after you all the time.
He was over here for dinner and had some great Feller steaks with us one night. It was awesome.
Yeah,
so he's grown way past hot dogs.
I won't say who, but at lunch day, somebody came up to Dane Mizutani, me, and Dylan Laux at Tom Reed's, and this person had Gorg as his high school coach at Mounds View. Let's just say not a fan. You know how I always say that I don't know if I've ever met somebody that has a bad word to say about Gorg. Wrong.
This guy did?
Yes. Not a fan of him as a coach.
Yeah, he was. They had a couple decent teams the 2 years he was there. He got into the TV business because he got upset in the first round of the playoffs. We told that story.
Yeah, where he wouldn't let them leave the bench or something.
No, it was in the playoffs. They were playing White Bear Lake in the first round. Mounds View was the 4 seed. White Bear was the 5. And I had gone to the 2 head coaches and said, whichever one of you loses has to come and be my color guy for the rest of the section hockey week. We were doing like 6 games in the next 4 nights during section hockey week. And Gorg's team lost, so he came and was my color guy. That was what started his TV career, because then he did the state tournament with me on the radio. Then when I got the state tournament on TV job, he was my analyst for that. I got the Gopher pre and post game job. I said, hey, Kevin Gorg would be good for this. So that if he had won that game like he was supposed to, Mike Schwartz would probably now be the sideline reporter for the Minnesota Wild, because he would have been tagging along with me for the rest of my career. But Gorgie was, at that time, he was teaching detention, I think, at Irondale while coaching hockey at Mounds View. It was, let's just say,
that's like when to be a coach, you had to work at a school.
You had to work in the district, I think. And I forget what the technical word was, but it was some kind of kids that were disciplined and had to go in the basement of Irondale with Gorgie as their supervisor.
That actually was kind of fun.
Have
him tell you like about movies and stuff.
A little bit. It was, imagine trying to do your pregame research and tracking Gorg down for details on statistics and things on the players. I finally just showed up at his classroom one time because he hadn't gotten back to me for like 3 days. He's just got his feet up on the desk reading the racing form. And I walked in, I said, I need your stats, bud. He gets out a notebook paper, starts writing them down. Like, there's no chance those were accurate. Yeah. But we just went with them on the air because I had no other source.
You're right. What was the story again where he, though, wouldn't let the guys off the bench? He did leave his guys
on the bench. So that
he was like embarrassed in the game, and he wouldn't.
That was at Roseville Arena. They were playing against Roseville, and we were supposed to have Gorgie on as our first intermission guest. So our Tarmo Kubitz, my analyst, goes down to the Zamboni door, and I hear through the headset, like, hey, Gorgie's not here. Did you not set it up with him? I said, no, I set it up with him, said he'd be there first intermission. And all of a sudden I look out, the whole team is on the bench. The Zamboni's going around the ice, and he's got the team on the bench and Gorgie just standing on the bench behind him, staring off into space. So our camera guy runs down, taps him on the shoulder and says, hey, and so Gorgie runs across the ice while the Zamboni's going around and to meet Tarmo. And Tarmo says, well, I mean, how do you not start with, why is your team on the bench? and Kevin says, yep, it's time to send a message here, Tarmo. I told those guys they embarrassed me in the first period. I'm going to embarrass them the whole first intermission.
You know what's really funny about this conversation is that, so after this person just trashed Gorg to us, I said to Dan, I'm like, let's call Gorg. He goes, no, that'll rattle him. Don't do it.
Oh, it would rattle him for sure.
And so instead we just devoted 10 minutes to the pod to it.
You know, his backup goalie that year was the mascot. Something happened with his goalies, so he went to the mascot and asked him to come and play.
Was the mascot going to wear the mascot uniform in that?
I said, all you should have done is had him go in the net with the horse head on, and he would have intimidated the hell out of people.
Gorg could be a multi-millionaire right now because he invented the GoPro. You remember? He did. Like a state championship. He wore a camcorder on his head
at practice. Yeah. It was we've got video of it. It was duct taped on the top of his head before, and that was back in the day. In fact, you know who called the state tournament that year?
You?
No.
Who?
This was me. I'm younger than him.
Okay.
Chris Cuthbert.
Really? Oh, yeah. I did know that.
Canada,
yeah, I did know that.
Called the championship game. That he called the whole or most of the tournament that year. But that was back at Channel 4 was doing the tournament, and they would blow out the coverage. It was the TV coverage of the high school tournament back in those days, the feature stories they would do and everything. It was unbelievable. And it was at practice the week leading up. They had gone and put the camera on Gorgie's head at practice to show what a goalie sees.
Wow. Interesting. I had a buddy that I don't think you've met him, DB. He claims that I ruined his life because he came up with the idea of Netflix. And it is true. In like the 90s, he told me it'd be smart to like send DVDs to people's homes, and I told him that'd be the dumbest idea ever. But he still thinks that not only did I stop this brilliant idea, but that he actually would have been able to execute it as well if I didn't stop the idea. So, all right, this was a fun podcast. This time tomorrow, actually in 30 minutes on Wednesday from now, we will be on boarding that flight to Paris to connect. It'll be fun.
You'll have been in your seat for 45 minutes. I'll just be strolling to the gate.
I'll be like 6 mimosas in on that plane. It'll be my sleeping pill for this flight. Thanks to everybody for joining at the Aquarius Home Services studio. Again, we'll be doing a live show in August at some point at some site to be named later. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatments, Royal Credit Union, Bosch Law Firm, Feller's Ranch, and Twill in the Edina Galleria. Talk to you next week, everybody.